Phil thinks he's at NASA.
Ready. Well, everybody, this is the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and I'm not sure if we're up yet or not.
We are. Everybody's on.
Alrighty. Hi, I'm Phil Stasek. This is the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, welcoming you to another First Thursday event. We have a very, very important topic tonight. It's called At the Edge of Authoritarianism in America. Our event tonight is going to be looking at a topic that many people are very concerned about, justifiably so right now. All year long, the Space Coast Progressive Alliance has been examining issues that are important to Americans as we prepare to vote. Now, right now, as of October 1st, ballots are arriving in people's homes all across Brevard County. People are already voting all across America, and we have a very, very important decision to make. Now, we know that there are very, very interesting forces at work, but we at the SCPA are very concerned about the trend toward authoritarianism, in fact, toward fascism in America. We know that the president is asked not for just a second term, but he has actually said out loud that he'd like to have a third term and maybe more. These are grave concerns to us, and we think that it's important for us to have a very educated and informed discussion about the possible implications of that. Tonight we have four wonderful speakers. I'll be doing introductions shortly, but they are folks that some of you may recognize, some of you may not be familiar with, and they all bring to the table a little bit different perspective on this issue of the risk of authoritarianism in America. Tonight's program, again, is going to be focusing on the last of the topics that that we've been focusing on all year long about voting, the potential for voting. So this is a big one. We know that people are considering their opportunity to vote, and so we're really, really looking forward to giving you the best information when you fill out that ballot. I'd like to remind everybody, this is October, and so if anybody that's a member of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance would like to serve as an elected officer or on our board, nominations are open, and if you are interested in that, please call our Vice President, Raed Al-Shaibi, and his phone number is 321-961-5234. I'd also like to encourage you to go check out our newly updated website, the Space Coast Progressive Alliance website at www.scpaflorida.com. For those of you that are not members, we certainly encourage you to click that membership button or maybe even that contribute button on the website. We are always very happy when people support us. Our operations, when we have normal meetings in a normal building, are fairly expensive. Right now, we're obviously able to operate via Zoom, which...
Oops. Sorry. Hold on. Something's wrong here.
It looks like I got muted accidentally. Well, it's the
yeah, you did. I'm sorry.
The joy of modern technology. Anyway, guys, it's great to have you back. I hope that all of you were able to hear my plea for people to please check out our website. Please do take a good look at the opportunity to contribute or to join. Next month's program is going to be called Truth and Reconciliation, and it'll be after the election. I think it'll be a time for all of us in the wake of the election to be introspective and to think about how we're going to proceed with whatever leadership we have for our nation. Again, that'll be next month's first Thursday, November 5th. I would also like to say thanks to our Action Projects Committee. That's the committee that put together this event tonight and does so every month each year. Karen Houston, Sue Connolly, Larry Abdullah, and myself actually worked specifically on this project, but thanks to all of my partners, friends on the Action Projects Committee, our fearless leader, Paul Halpern, who's continuing to lead us on into the future. And something else that I very much would like to mention to our four panelists is that as we make our presentation tonight, we want all of our guests, all of our visitors to leave with an action item. There's really not a lot of point in educating people and just having them walk away. We want to encourage people to do something. And so I would ask each of our four panelists to think in their mind of an action item, something you would like our viewers to take with them as they leave our event, something to do. I have a couple things that I might suggest, but I'm interested in hearing what our four panelists have to say. And now it's time to introduce our four panelists. Our first speaker tonight will be Raed Al-Shaibi. He's the vice president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. He's a businessman and a community leader, and I have to thank Raed for leading the Space Coast Progressive Alliance this year, doing a valiant job of it. Our next speaker, Professor Andre Bailey. He is an associate professor of English and Russian studies at Eastern Florida State College and FIT. We'll also have Rodney Edwards, Esquire. He is the assistant city attorney for the city of Palm Bay and president of the Dr. Martin Luther King Coalition of Brevard. He's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and founder of the Brevard Inclusionary Alliance. And also we have Jose Luis Rivera Villamañan. Jose is a businessman, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and president of Grand Productions and PR USA Channel. And he's on the Florida Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Each of our speakers has a very full biography, and if you want to learn more about them, they're on our website, and I believe that's also running on Facebook right now. But leading off our discussion tonight is Raed, who's going to be talking about his experience growing up, living, doing business in the Middle East and authoritarianism there. Raed, you have the floor.
Thank you, Phil, and I appreciate your introduction to our panelists. And I, as Vice President of Space Coast Progressive Alliance, I would like to thank him myself. Thank all the audience for joining us tonight. What a timing for this program, and I thank the APC for really timing it perfectly. This subject tonight, unfortunately, might have some scars in me, so I might get emotional. I want to apologize up front. I don't know how many people lived through authoritarian regime in the audience, but I did. I was born in Palestine. I went through the occupation period. I went to live in Jordan. I lived in Syria. I lived in Lebanon. And I lived in Morocco for 5 years as well. Authoritarianism is a struggle. Almost 500 million people have and continue to endure in the Middle East, a region that is full of corruption. You see, I cherish the ability to speak in such a forum tonight and able to critique my president, my government, and the path we're heading into. There's no way you will be able to find this civic opportunity in the Middle East. There's no way. The Middle East remain, right now, the region with the highest concentration of authoritarian regime in the world. 22 countries range between monarchs, kingdoms, emirs, or whatever they call, some called republics, or with authoritarian regime prepared to do any harm to their citizen to maintain power. Tunisia is the only country right now to hold on to a democratic victory that happened in 2011 after the Arab Spring. The only country, but still gets a lot of pressure now from neighboring countries like Egypt and the UAE to relinquish power back to corrupted authoritarian regime. See, they do not want to give their civilian hope, because hope will renew another Arab Spring and they will immediately lose their control of power. See, no ruler in the Middle East, king, emir, or president ever relinquished power in the past almost 100 years through a voting ballots. None. It's either they get assassinated or overthrown by a military coup, which usually end up producing another dictatorship. We just witnessed one in Egypt about a few years ago. Sisi took a military coup. Libya just went through one, and now we have they call him Haftar. He's in charge of the military and trying to rebel against a democratic elected in the capital. We have one in Sudan. There are no real political parties or real national election in that region. Kingdoms, Emirates, as in Saudi, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Jordan, even Oman, all these kings and emirs were appointed by the colonizing powers in the early 30s. See, the French, the British, and even the Italians in North Africa, and continue to pass their reigns, these kings, to their offsprings as if they own a freaking farm. Excuse my French. I mean, we're not in the medieval or the Mongol times anymore. This is the freaking 21st century, for God's sake. And we're still passing power through my son and my cousin and this is ridiculous. On the other hand, the so-called republic like the Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Algeria, whatever, election do exist, but the results will be declared with no shame at their ridiculous margin. 99.7% he won, 99.5%. They will declare him. They're not ashamed. Those are the so-called election. And I will share a few, like in Egypt, the first true election happened in 2012. And as I pointed earlier, they toppled the regime of Mubarak that held on to power for 32 years. This new president took on Morsi with a margin of 51.7%. I looked it up. Only to last 11 months. And was taken over by a military coup by a general in the army. His name is Sisi. And now he's in power, supported by the whole world and even the United States. It's a shame that we take an elected official and bring a military coup and support it. Bashar Assad is another example. Inherit presidency from his father. In 1952, his father took on the presidency of Syria. Stayed in power to 2000, then passed it on to his son. His son was a doctor. Just brought him in and said, okay, I'm going to die, you're going to take over. And the guy took over, made an election, had a 99.82% approval, supposedly in the first election. Then in 2014 had another election after he killed 500,000 of his people. We all know what's going on in Syria right now. 500,000 he killed. And there's 6 million refugees all over the world. Obama put a fine line, red line for him. And we let him go. Shame on us, on the democratic world, for not supporting these people in the Middle East. They need freedom. They need people to know that the Middle East is not, the people are not backward. It's their leadership. Saddam of Iraq, allowed to stay in power 34 years, used chemical weapons on his people. Gaddafi of Libya, 43 years. Saleh of Yemen, 35 years. Abidine of Tunisia, before he was toppled in 2011, 32 years. The Sultan of Oman, 47 years. He just died and passed it on to his cousin. All non-aligned states whose main foreign policy objective is to mainly maintain security of their royal and elite family thrones, they will make oil and arm deals only to please the West and use weapons on their people and neighboring civilians, as it's happening right now in Yemen and in Libya. These are our allies. Now, how is my life in this authoritarian regime? And I'm sorry about being loud, but it gets into me. And I'll share 6 quick ones, and I will tie them in to what's going on here in the Americas. First one, when I grew up through the Middle East, 21 years. Number one is unfair distribution of wealth. See, politics and commerce should never be in the hand of one authority. I never felt it was fair to live and compete. It's who you know there. It's the connection with the Secret Service. It's really a fair environment for the normal Joe. Second thing, allegiance to the flag or to the country? No. Your allegiance is to the guy on the helm, to the emir, to the king, to the president. Otherwise, you're going to disappear. Self-belonging is shallow. It's mainly groomed based on tribalism. Third thing is hero worship. And we're going to see it here. I'll talk about it here. Hero worship, an element deeply entrenched in that region. See, people fail to realize that when you create a hero out of your politicians, that will lead to fascism. And I don't know if people are aware of the Nasser era in Egypt, the Saddam era in Iraq. He was the hero. And look what he led their country and his people to. This is a great factor in creating dictatorship. Government funding TVs. TV channels who are censored to guide public into certain path and compliance. Now they use social media and they fund billions of dollars because people now are getting into the social media. So they're creating this army of electronics. We call them electronic flies. You'll find fake profiles all over any opposition page. Number 5, public figures. See, if you're an artist, an actor, or a known journalist who the people look up to, they'll direct them to endorse and support the ruling party only. Otherwise, they'll disappear. And we all know what happened to Khashoggi, the journalist. One of the latest horror story out of that region. He was cut up in pieces by a chainsaw in a Saudi embassy for speaking against the new king's son. This is the country that we continue to support. Thugs like this Mohammed bin Salman and Sisi of Egypt and bin Rashid of UAE. Just observe Kushner. Just observe Kushner to strategize with all these. I want to call them names now because I'll get over it. They're just supporting these guys and will continue to do so. Why? The last thing I'll bring up is fear. I grew up with another factor, fear of others, fear of the people beyond your circle, from your tribe, from your region. See, it's a divide and conquer. And Jordanian feared Palestinians, Lebanese feared Syrians, and Saudi feared Yemenis, Northerners feared Southerners. And this is what's going to happen. When people perceive an increase in disorder, they will feel tremendous anxiety. This anxiety will lead to a quest for security. To bring a sense of safety back into the people's life, they unfortunately will latch onto authoritarianism and conformity. That's why I'd like to share a few minutes to talk about my experience here and what's going to happen. See, we have we need to be able to focus on anti-heroism. Don't ever make a hero of any politician. No matter how great they are, no person shall be elected to the office of the president or any leading position more than twice. Priceless word of the 22nd Amendment of the US Constitution. But it has been challenged now by the president here. Number 2, diversity is being challenged and labeled with ugly names here in the United States. Supremacy is flourishing. There are many who are propagating the narrative that racial, religious, and ethnic diversity is a clear and present threat to our national security. Third one, the use of federal agent and National Guard. I've seen it here, it's happening. Police should be the only one to deal with public unrest. We should all support the law and order. But sending paramilitary forces, this is what I lived through in the Middle East. You can't allow that. Fear. When activated by fear, authoritarian-leaning Americans might predispose to trade civil liberty for a strongman solution to secure law and order. That's what's happening now. And from what I see, they are ready to strip civil liberties from those defined as the other. See, weaponizing fear to attain power is what I grew up with. Fear breeds repression. That repression breeds hate. That hate will stabilize authoritarian control. Ladies and gentlemen, in November, we have a choice. Freedom or fear. If we choose freedom, our work is not done. It's been stirred and embraced as deeply as it has been in the last 3.5 years. See, we need to take action personally, institutionally, and socially to rebuild the guards of our democracy. By the way I see it, both parties, Republican and Democrats, and their establishment have not presented leadership with a uniting solution. So let me be clear. Our fellow Americans, including our authoritarian neighbors, are not the enemy. They are not the enemy. We, the people, we need to stop othering each other. No more schoolyard labeling of one another. Libtards and snowflakes and deplorable, whatever they names, there is no enemy within, except the self-interested misleaders, the Mitch McConnell kind, who hide or inflame our problems. The real enemy is ignorance on our part. Self-interest institution seeking dominance on the other side. So we need to limit the influence of money in politics. We need to rebuild faith in the institution of government. Socially, it's important. We must confront and make peace with our history. We have much to be proud of as American, but we also have a history and a track that need to be confronted. Reconciliation of our past will strengthen us as people. I'm sorry for this long venting presentation. Those fears might sound unrealistic. It's high time that we all stopped being tools and victim to partisan and narrow, selfish lobbyists. If we continue here unchecked, we'll surely end what we have come to cherish as the American dream that I came to, the American way of life. It's our voice, our vote, our future. Vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I'll tell you what, a very, very thoughtful, insightful summary of this topic. And we thank you for that. Frankly, I want to give you a round of applause. It's very important. Our next speaker is Andrei Bailey. He is Associate Professor of English Russian Studies. Professor Bailey, you have the floor.
Hello, welcome. I'm glad to be here. Well, I was listening to Raid and I didn't realize that Russia is in the Middle East right now, not geographically, but politically. Well, I have a very unique experience of being born in the Soviet Union in 1966, behind the Iron Curtain. So I saw communism from the inside. And then I lived through perestroika, the Gorbachev's reforms of liberalization. And then that was a very exciting time. The country was waking up, the democracy was being born, elections became real and not fake. Boris Yeltsin was dancing rock and roll, you know, in front of the voters to get elected. So Putin doesn't even accept the idea of debates. No, there is nobody to debate with. So then I saw the democracy, the very, very fragile democracy in Russia, quickly dying under Putin. A former KGB agent was able to take control of all the commanding posts in the society and was able to entirely subdue the free media, the opposition, and basically became a new dictator. As you learned recently, there was a sort of an election campaign where they decided that Putin can restart his presidency count. So he already served 4 or 5 terms. He's like pretty much unlimited now. So until he dies, he will be president. Sounds like the Middle East, right? What I want to say, I've seen it all. Actually, an interesting part of my biography, I was defending democracy in Russia, risking my own life when in 1990, there was an attempted coup that wanted to overthrow democratically elected government by Boris Yeltsin. Don't know if you remember that. Boris Yeltsin refused to give up power. And then KGB leaders brought tanks and snipers and assault troops to surround the Russian White House, which was the parliament building. I was a university student at that time, and we didn't have even cell phones. And then somehow we all called each other. About 10, 15,000 people gathered to surround the White House. I was one of them. So we saw the helmets of the special forces. We saw the guns pointed at us. We were waiting that they were going to start shooting at any time. We were told what to do if there is a gas attack. So I had my bandana, which I soaked in a dirty, was a fall, deep fall in Russia, rain, cold. And then I soaked it and I put it on my, like we do today with masks. I was breathing that dirt because one of the guys told us that if they attack with gas, then this will be the only way you can actually stay sane because it won't be tear gas. It'll be a chemical agent. So I lived through that. And then we won that year, by the way. They didn't fire. And the army started defecting. And then there was a few tanks that came and took our side. And from that point, the communist regime collapsed immediately. Well, Putin brought it back. But what I want to say to all the Americans, who haven't experienced what it feels like to have fear that there will be a knock on your door. When I go to Russia, I don't go very often, even now, I feel that fear. They're gonna hold me at the border. They're gonna ask me, what am I doing here as an American citizen? That they will put drugs in my pocket and then, accuse me of espionage. This has happened. In Moscow today, any Russian citizen can take a white sheet of paper all by himself, stand somewhere, anywhere in downtown, and then just erase it, a white sheet of paper. They will be arrested for anti-government extremism. A white sheet of paper, people have tried, nothing written on it. This is an absolute reality. Freshly from the news, the Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, who was again poisoned by Putin like many of his enemies, but miraculously survived, and he's in Germany. If you wear a shirt with his face on the streets of Moscow, you're arrested immediately. So these are the people that President Trump likes. This is why he's so fascinated with Putin, that absolute power, that unlimited power with no checks, no balances, no restraint, raw, unlimited power of a sultan, of a king, of somebody who can chop up a journalist in the embassy. This is what Trump admires. And that's why he never said anything bad about Putin. In fact, he wrote that he's one of his big supporters. So the reason Russia is helping Trump to get elected, and they did help, there is really no question. In Russia, it's not even a secret that they influenced our elections, whatever the Mueller report says. We know the players, we know what it did. It wasn't even a big secret in Russia. People were talking about that. So the reason they want to help President Trump, because it's like the dictator likes a dictator. So I'm pretty sure they can all unite. The president of Turkey, Kim Jong-Un in North Korea, Putin, Trump, the president of Brazil. Look how many of them are all around the world. This is not an isolated incident. What has happened in the United States, unfortunately, I see personally in the context of global changes, where we can see a reemergence of dictatorships in countries that didn't even have them. And the countries, obviously, that had them, like in the Middle East, continue to be the dictatorships. And what I want to tell all the Americans, that you can lose it without even noticing. So very quickly, as they say in Russia, who wins the election? Whoever counts the votes. You may lose even any control over how the votes are counted. Look at what is happening in Belarus. Their president, a self-proclaimed dictator, who was actually diagnosed with schizophrenia and discharged from the Soviet army in his young years. So a schizophrenic, a diagnosed schizophrenic, has been ruling the country for like 30 years, supported by Putin. There was an election and people finally decided to say no. The country, or the entire country is on strike. Not just, intelligentsia. People in the factories go on strike. Nobody wants to see him around. They call him the cockroach. This is his new nickname. And this guy wins the election with 87% or so votes, officially. This is the kind of the elections they have. We may get to that point without even noticing. So all it takes is, slow or rapid changes of changing the people that are in power, changing the judges, the Supreme Court, whoever it is. And before you notice, you will be in a fascist style dictatorship. So it's so ironic that I came to the United States in search of freedom. And the American flag has always been, to me, a symbol of freedom. This is why the United States is admired for many people all around the world. They may not like the policies of the United States, the imperialistic policies, but many people come to the United States. The Statue of Liberty is the perpetual symbol. And it's darkly ironic that I'm talking about authoritarianism and fascism emerging in the United States as I speak. It's just mind-boggling to me that I'm even discussing that subject, but I want to warn everybody that democracy is a very fragile substance. If we don't defend it, if we are not firm, if we take a wait and see attitude, if we are not sure well, what will happen is what happened in Belarus. People will be voting against the dictator, but the dictator will be winning the elections. So President Trump is already saying he will not accept. So we would pretty much may have a Belarusian scenario. Belarus is going through that right now. So, and I don't want people to give up. I don't want people to accept this outcome, and they need to fight. They need to defend. They cannot stay home. First, you need to vote. A decisive victory would be great, but if the election results are entirely denied by the president and his supporters, this may not be unnoticed. People must take action. People must do something about it, because they can lose their country before they know. I've seen it. I've lived through this, and this is a nightmarish experience. You feel like you're suffocating, that they can tighten the noose on your neck, figuratively and literally, and people begin to live in fear, like they do in Russia now. And that fear cannot be part of American society. So we need to stop that. We need to act, and we need to, again, fight for our cause.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'll tell you what, you have seen some of the worst that our nation, that our planet has ever had. Before your time, of course, some of the you know, if we look back toward Germany, and we often think of Hitler, but the truth is that Stalin was probably one of the most powerful, most onerous dictators that have existed on the face of the earth, in terms of number of lives lost and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and an interesting fact from my life is my grandfather died fighting the Nazis. So I'm a grandson of a victim of the Nazi regime. He picked up the arms and joined the army in order to stop the Nazis, and he died. So, and maybe where I'm living because of him, because of his sacrifice. So we cannot allow this to come back. And the fact that, in my opinion, Trump and this whole ethos that comes with him, I spoke to enough of his supporters to recognize fascism. This is fascism. This is not an exaggeration. This is not a metaphor. I can prove it to you. I can give a lecture on that subject, comparing item by item, that this is nothing short of fascism, because fascism is not just, they show these evil Nazis throwing Jews in the concentration camps in the movies. No, the fascism is ordinary. It takes roots in the minds of the people, their reactions, their treatment of each other, their ideas, their prejudices, their phobias. So that's where it takes roots. It didn't happen overnight in Germany, but it happened eventually. It cost the world. I'm afraid to even quote how many people. Roughly 60, 70 million people died in World War II because of the Nazi regime. And the fact that President Trump refuses even to condemn white supremacy, because basically they're feeding, his energy, is a stunning example and a shocking example. And that's why I'm extremely concerned, and I want people to be aware of that.
Professor, thank you once again. I think this is a very, very, very important time for you to have the floor. So thank you for that. And our next speaker, Rodney Edwards, again, Assistant City Attorney, Palm Bay, President of Dr. Martin Luther King Coalition. Frankly, this is something that many people forget, and that is that for a large portion of our population, they have essentially been living under an authoritarian regime for, well, let's say 400 years. And of course, the truth is that if you ask any African American about authoritarianism, they kind of go, oh yeah, you mean like my daily life? Like I go out and get in the car and I worry about which cop is going to stop me for having a broken taillight or for some imagined fault. And the truth is, you may not survive that traffic stop. It's very, very important to understand that that Black folks in this country have tasted this for a lot longer than than most of us realize. And that's why it's very important for us to have Rodney Edwards today. Rodney, you have the floor.
Thank you, Phil. The members of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, I thank you for this opportunity to speak on this important topic. As he indicated, my name is Rodney Edwards. I'm the president of the Dr. Martin Luther King Coalition and the founder of the Board Inclusionary Alliance. And as he stated, I am the assistant city attorney for the city of Palm Bay, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the city or the city attorney's office, but here to just speak about where we feel the African American community is in relationship to what's taking place at the current moment. There's an old saying in African American communities that is often applied to the broad stroke disparity of our nation's economy. And that's stated that when America catches a cold, Black folks get pneumonia. And although this cliche is reference to the downturn in economies and hardships that individuals go through, I think that it applies to what we're facing right now. Many of us feel that we're facing some very hard times and some things that are going to potentially change America. But for African Americans, we've been going through this for decades. There's been much discussion and disagreement over the 1619 project that was developed by the New York Times Magazine as it relates to the consequences of slavery. I've watched many debates on both sides of the argument, and each one of them have valid points on both sides of the issue as it may relate to the severity of slavery. However, I would argue that for the last 400 years, African Americans have been under an authoritarian or totalitarian rule. And what is that? That's a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial and requires complete subservience to the state. If you look back over our history, some would say we were in slavery for 400 years, but I would go back to 1619 and just credit slavery as being 246 years, from 1619 to 1865, when we entered into Reconstruction. No doubt, I think it's easy to show and prove that slavery would fit into this form of dictatorial, authoritarian regime or rule. But following those 246 years, we experienced about 5 years of Reconstruction. During that time, we were allowed to thrive, we were allowed to get property, but that was very short-lived because next we went into Jim Crow, which lasted 95 years, from 1870 to 1965. And during this period of time, it was a period of time where African Americans were disenfranchised and removed politically and economic gains of Reconstruction. One of the biggest Supreme Court cases that upheld this ability was Plessy versus Ferguson, which held that we could be treated separately but equal in education and in facilities. During the same period of time, we lost our Black Wall Street in 1921, which was known as the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was basically pretty much destroyed. And many people lost their life and came up missing based in a racial riot at that time. That was followed up by the Civil Rights era and our creation of the Ku Klux Klan, in which many of us in our African American communities were lynched in the South. Many here, even in this county, were bombed. People were murdered. Our civil rights leaders were murdered. And this was all in the name of maintaining order, maintaining the regime, that they felt that we had to be kept in check in order for America to be, I guess, great again. So arguing in spite of all of that, African Americans have been successful. And I put that towards the resilience of our people. And so, but I think those are easy examples from a Black perspective to demonstrate what we are going through now. But I think that there have been more recent issues that have a greater effect on what we're going through now as an African American community worldwide. And those two things, or a couple things, was the war on drugs and the 1994 crime bill, which was known as the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. The war on drugs began probably in the 1970s with President Nixon. And that was supposed to be a global campaign led by US federal government, drug prohibitions, military aid, and military intervention with the aim of bringing about a reduction of illegal drug trade in the United States. But here at home, it became more of a government-led initiative aimed to stop illegal drug use, distribution, and the drug trade. And the method that they used to accomplish this was to dramatically increase prison sentences for both drug dealers and users. And what did that look like for us? You had an epidemic at the time that was going on between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. It's one drug, the same drug, just prepared in a different manner. One drug used in the African American community, which was crack. The other form of the drug, the powder cocaine, was more prevalent in the white community. But there was a desperate impact and treatment towards sentencing, because even for the same drug, the sentencing guidelines was 100 times greater for those that were caught with crack cocaine as compared to powder cocaine. With the 1994 crime bill, it was one of the largest crime bills in history. The crime bill consisted of over 365 pages. In that crime bill, we saw 100,000 new police officers added to the streets. That same crime bill gave us $9.7 billion in funding for prisons. It gave us $6.1 billion in funding for crime programs. And so what did these two programs or these two policies do? They created a mass incarceration of minorities over the last 20 to 40 years. We've also seen with these two issues of over-policing of our neighborhoods. In the 80s and 90s, we saw a militarization of our police forces, where no longer were we experiencing community-based policing, but now we had individuals in our community driving equipment that was recently seen on the battlefield. These aren't things that bring about trust in the community when our own citizens are facing the combat that's seen in the Middle East. In some parts of our country, in New York to be specific, we saw a new police procedure or tactic that was created called stop and frisk, which allowed police officers to just walk up to individuals, mostly minorities, and to stop them and frisk them without basic probable cause, just based on the violence of the area. We've also experienced a period of police brutality and police murder. Some would say it's on the rise, but I believe that the availability of cell phones, dashboard cameras, and body cameras are just revealing what many have complained about for years. The prevalence of cell phone cameras in people's pockets now allow them to take those cameras out and record via Facebook or record for later playing purposes at any given moment, which allows us to capture the activities of police officers that are not operating according to their oath to serve and protect. Most of this violence is against African Americans. And we see far different treatment of non-minorities. Sometimes we see non-minorities who argue, fight with police officers, and they live to see another day. They're just handcuffed and taken to jail. In recent time, we've seen how this desperate treatment affects our community. When you see individuals like Dylan Roof, who created a massacre at Emmanuel Church in South Carolina. After massacring 9 people, he was escorted and taken to eat. Just recently in Kenosha, you saw Kyle Rittenhouse, who had just murdered 2 individuals during a protest rally, and he was permitted to walk right past police officers with an AR-15 in his hand. But then you see minorities like Jacob Blake Jr. from Kenosha, who was shot in the back after he was trying to break up a fight. You see people like George Floyd, who was murdered by 4 police officers. One of those police officers kept his knee on his neck even after he was no longer moving. And what was it over? A $20 counterfeit bill. You see things like Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old young man who was playing in the park with a fake gun, and the police officers roll up and they kill him. Eric Garner in New York, who lost his life over a loose cigarette. Philando Castile, who lost his life in Minnesota while his girlfriend streamed it live on Facebook. Alton Sterling, who lost his life in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for selling CDs outside of a store. And so when we have these situations that come about, rarely are they punished. We see in the most recent example of Breonna Taylor, who died at the hands of police officers serving a no-knock warrant. And even in the indictment of the people who killed Breonna Taylor, not one charge was levied against the officer for the murder of Breonna Taylor. The only charges came from his stray bullets going into another house. Then we're experiencing a period in recent times based on, and I think our president, of vigilantism, where we now have individuals who feel like they are the judge and jury and the convictor for African Americans. We had this example of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, who lost his life for wearing a hoodie because another individual thought he looked suspicious as he walked home with iced tea and Skittles. We had Jordan Davis in Jacksonville, who lost his life because he was playing loud music at a convenience store. Recently, you have Ahmaud Arbery in South Georgia, who lost his life while jogging through a neighborhood that he didn't live in. And he was actually hunted like an animal and lost his life. Recently, we heard our president endorse and refuse to denounce the Proud Boys and other white nationalist groups, stating, "Stand back and stand by." So what is our attack? After the marching, after the protesting, after the demonstrating, what must we do? We must vote. We must vote. We must vote. Many of the situations that I spoke about with incarceration, we dealt with Amendment 4, where we allowed the restoration of rights for convicted felons. And even though we passed that amendment, there were some challenges to stop that from going into place. And so we are at a position now that although we have the right to vote for convicted felons, they can't have fines or fees. Sorry.
1 more minute, Rodney.
And so we're considering that as a poll tax. So what I'm asking is that we get together and we get everyone that we know and love and make sure they get an absentee ballot, a mail-in ballot, or we take them to the polls with us on election day. We don't need to wait until election day to cast our votes. We should be pushing people to go as soon as the polls open for early voting. That is the only way we're going to stop this president from being a dictator. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. Thank you very much. And I'll tell you what, that I think is the overwhelming message of tonight, and that is that people must participate in our democracy or we will lose it. Voting is everything. Voting is why we're here, really. And for those who have not been to the Harry and Harriet Moore Museum up in Mims, I think it's important for everyone to make a pilgrimage up there. If you've never seen it, you've got to go. It does put a lot of this into perspective. If you don't understand this history, you are doomed to repeat it. And we will never repeat that again. This is, we must, through the Black Lives Matter movement, through whatever movement we have to bring all Americans together, to look at each other as equals and to march on to the future that we want to have, not the future that we are destined to have. We must shape the future that we want for ourselves and our children. Rodney, thank you so much. Our next speaker, Jose Luis Rivera Villamañan. He is a businessman, entrepreneur, philanthropist, president of Grand Productions, PR USA. Frankly, he has seen a version of authoritarianism. Many people would look to Cuba and say, Castro, classic authoritarian. But throughout Latin America, South America, and other places, authoritarianism, dictatorships, fascism flourish today. Jose Luis, you have the floor.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'd like to say that it was very revealing what we heard from Raid, from Andre, and Rodney. I will try to bring a bit of light into Latin American samples we've seen around the world, particularly focusing on Latin America, and look at the etymology and meaning of some of the terms to start with, and then look at specific examples and bring us to some common ground that we can identify when authoritarianism is beginning to show its ugly face. But I thought I'd show you a nice background. So that's Culebra Island, which Felix Stasek may be aware of, next to Puerto Rico, which, by the way, it's a kind of interesting thing, because talking about authoritarianism, Puerto Rico is part of, but not incorporated into the United States. It's a territory, and people don't get to vote for congressmen, but for one resident commissioner who has a voice in some committees, and at sometimes not if it's a deciding vote on the floor, but on committees in Congress. So we only get one. We should actually have 5 representatives and 2 senators in Puerto Rico representing us. And we don't get to vote for the president. We only vote in the primaries. So that's kind of interesting. But that would be the case for you all if you live in Puerto Rico too. It has nothing to do with being Puerto Rican or Mexican or African American or white American. It has simple fact to do with where you live. So if you move to Puerto Rico, you cannot vote for anybody except for the local officials. And that applies to everybody because we're American citizens like everybody else. But anyhow, that shows a little bit of authoritarianism there, because it's not a very fair system, is it? So now, talking about my Cuban attire, you can take it from the left if you are thinking about Cuba, or you can take it to the right if you're thinking about Miami. But let's talk about the left and right a little bit in this process and define authoritarianism as the enforcement or advocacy of strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. And then as a system of government in which a single person or party possesses supreme and absolute power, the decisions of this autocrat are subject to neither external legal restraints nor regularized mechanisms of popular control, which is not quite the case here yet. So absolute monarchies are more exemplifying of that, and dictatorships in the modern day forms of autocracy. So we're going to go through history and etymology, which we started, comparisons with other forms of government, origin and developments, autocracy promotion, historical examples, and summary of problems and solutions we can identify. So as far as autocracy, again, as defined, the antonym of it would be democracy. In the case of democracy, is a system of government by the whole population or all its eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. So capitalism and democracy are the ascendant in the third world. That is the common understanding. And antonyms would be tyranny and dictatorship. as for despotism, which shows its ugly face a while, is defined as the exercise of absolute power, especially in cruel and oppressive way, as kingdoms, for instance, that Raid was talking about. And when we talk about oligarchies, we see a lot of that through South America, as Phil very well knows. It's the case in many countries still, including mostly the right-leaning countries, and we see it still in Brazil, which is pretty advanced. So a small group of people having control of a country, organization, or institution. So the ruling oligarchies of military men around the president, for instance, or the oligarchies that are known to be also the wealthy families that run a country, normally between 3 to 10 that run pretty much what's going on financially in a country. Totalitarianism is a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial and requires complete subserviency to the state. So democratic countries were fighting against totalitarianism all their existence. Fascism, defined as an authoritarian and nationalistic, which we're seeing a bit of that, right-wing system of government and social organization. The antonyms, again, are democracy and liberalism. As for despotism, or the exercise of absolute power, especially in cruel and oppressive ways in Arab countries and some places in Latin America and in Africa, we find, again, autocracy, monocracy, and autarky as synonyms. When we look at common themes in history and internationally, we find some I'd like to summarize, and those are law and order must prevail. We see that in Italian fascism, in Nazi Germany, and Russia's Stalin that was mentioned earlier, in China's and North Korea and Belarus and Russia and Hungary at this moment. And Sturmabteilung was Ernst Röhm's paramilitary units that would take care of law and order, or the brown shirts that eventually became the SS. So paramilitary and this kind of small nationalistic groups that could be seen or named as militia are things that we have to be very careful about, that they keep growing in their strength and acceptance, and that's a very dangerous sign. When we look at human rights, sometimes that is equated to socialism or liberalism. So the use of extreme and scary labels to be able to use extreme measures of control, like in China, China plus in China is seen as capitalism, to be the human rights is too associated to capitalism, and the US intervention in their affairs. Hong Kong and China persecution of Uyghurs as identified as Muslims in China is in the direct opposite of the same issue here in the States. So here is socialism, over there is capitalism. It's kind of interesting, but that's also common themes we find. Protest in our country is associated or equated to communism. So external factors as enemy countries, China, Russia, and Iran are supposed to be behind the protest. And nationalism and xenophobia and anti-immigration is equated to economic progress and racial predominance or purity, as in Hungary, for instance, or in Germany when it was called Einheit or Deutschwederminstenung, Einheit being unity. So the integrity of Germany could be achieved only through racial purity and eliminating other races and other groups. Other common themes is military, vigilantes, and militias support we spoke about. So the brown shirts, we spoke about supremacist groups all over Latin America, the military juntas in Latin America. So the military power is always brought in to support the ruler, and the ruler wants to associate and have generals around him to show strength and quench the opposition. Displays and focus on police state and military might. The ruler and the state will protect you, and they will do all these displays of military equipment like they do in Russia, and they did so much in Nazi Germany. Create chaos. This requires extreme measures and paramilitary military forces again. Displays and focus on police state and military might. The ruler and the state will protect you again. Minorities and immigrants are a threat and dangerous, must be disciplined and controlled. So these are common themes. Some more: electoral crisis and claims of corruption, the rise of hardline regimes to save the country from collapse and destruction, military support and rule always ultimately required. When we look at oligarchies and latifundiums, power and wealth are concentrated at the very top by the few families that are very rich and powerful and rule the government as well. I'll give you an example. At Panama, I used to go there for business. I saw a national revolt taking place because a lot of people were dying when they were doing construction work on the roads, like 50 or 60 a year, that were not being properly protected. So the ruling family, I was doing consulting with the distillery there, Ron Abuelo and Jean Caballito, the Varela family. They ended up putting one of their brothers into the presidency. And at the time also, before that, Noriega was taken out by the US government because he quit collaborating with the CIA and started doing a little business with the Colombians. So we simply took this ruler out that was supported by the oligarchies. When he started losing the oligarchy support, he was able to get, the US was able to get in there and pull him out. But if he would have had the support of the oligarchies ruling in Panama, all these families, that wouldn't have been as easy. So it gets a little interesting how foreign affairs come into play. So media is an enemy in Russia and China and Cuba, North Korea. I saw it in Cuba. I was there. There was only 2 radio stations, 2 TV stations, very boring. And all the information was filtered, and you were against the revolution if you were opposing the government, not opposing the government as such. It was always you were opposing societal progress, and you were opposing what they called our revolution. So state-owned media only those countries. Nicaragua, while Somoza was the dictator there, he had Chamorro, who had the leading newspaper there, killed. However, interesting anecdote, I met his daughter in Key Biscayne. I was invited to play some tennis, and they said, we want to introduce you to this lady. They didn't say her last name. Eventually, this Swedish trained lady, because they all these oligarchy families send their kids to study in Switzerland, for the most part, to very rich kid boarding schools, or England. So in talking to her, she said she was very close friends, and I had been introduced to her through a Chamorro lady that was related to Violeta Chamorro, the president. So in all these countries, all these oligarchies eventually come together and play together. And this is kind of mind-boggling, because I was very shocked. I was not very happy to meet this lady, and needless to say, I declined the invitation to play tennis. But it's very interesting how Latin America, all these powerful families want to kind of marry with each other, and eventually, even though there's been blood between them, they want to rise to power, and that's the way they work. So they come together. So in Dominican Republic, democracy is good press, and eventually the U.S. As an example, the press is very good in the Dominican Republic. Consequently, they've been able to sustain their movement towards democracy. And that's a very interesting example. However, in the US, Nixon and the South of the US were not very happy with the press, as we all know. And in the South, in Texas, the movement to improve the quality of life of Mexicans came about of a tiny little newspaper run by a woman. This is turn of the century, in the early 20th century. In propaganda, going now to propaganda, the propaganda machines are consistently repeating the same storyline, versions like Goebbels, churning out conspiracy theories like QAnon, like InfoWars. The logos are very important, the slogans, the symbols, consistency of message among supporters of the leading regime is the key, or the mantra. Moving to loyal. Other autocratic promotional tools is loyal servants, which must have absolute unswerving loyalty and servilism, obedience to the ruler, not the constitution or the country, subjugation, legal persecution to opponents, and are treated as criminals. And that's the way the game works. And we're very concerned to see some of that happening. So playing the game, you get rewarded. Patronized, condescending treatment of submissive servants. They must be bowing to the ruler, and for that they use propaganda and media to show you that if you play the game, you get rewarded. So despite the attention to the problematic consequences of authoritarianism, little research focuses on the cause of such unquestioning respect for proper authority, elaborating on the social learning approach to authoritarianism. Economic inequality within countries shapes individuals' feelings toward authority. As differences of condition increase, so does the relative power of the wealthy. As a result, regardless of their incomes, individuals' experiences are more likely to lead them to view hierarchical relations as a natural, and in turn to hold greater respect for authority. and multi-level models of authoritarianism in countries around the world over 3 decades support this relative power theory. So people come to accept that as normal, basically. Economic development can also boost public support for authoritarianism regimes in the short to medium term. So economic reasons is used as the justification in Latin America to impose a military rule because it was getting out of hand, because there was too much corruption, because the elections were fraudulent. And hindrances to free and fair elections in authoritarian regimes may include control of the media by the authoritarian incumbents, interference with opposition campaigning, as was the case in Russia, just mentioned earlier, electoral fraud, violence against the opposition, that was done in Russia too, and in Arab countries, very commonly done, large-scale spending by the state in favor of the incumbents, permitting some parties, and this goes to the incredible amount of money that's running the game here. We know that there is a specific case, if you remind me, Phil, the case of what, against who?
I'm not sure you're talking about Trump currently?
No, the Koch investment. There's a case that allows a lot of money to go into politics, basically.
Oh, Citizens United.
Citizens United. Okay, so that's typical in this historical and sociological analysis. Permitting some parties but not others, prohibitions of opposition parties but not independent candidates, and allowing competition between candidates within the incumbent party but not those that are not within the incumbent party. So interactions with other listed masses, the foundation of stable authoritarian rule are that authoritarian prevent the contestation from the masses and other elites. The authoritarian regime may use co-option or repression or carrots and sticks to prevent revolts. As for, let me obviate that, that's getting a little technical. So in World War II and the Cold War that ended in 1991, so 1995, 1991, resulted in the replacement of authoritarian regimes by the democratic regimes or regimes that were less authoritarian. In World War II, we saw the defeat of the Axis of Powers by the Allied powers with Europe, and all the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan, had totalitarian or authoritarian governments. And 2 of the 3 were replaced by governments based on democratic institutions.
Luis, you have 30 seconds.
Okay, so let me summarize by bringing in the case of Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Venezuela, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua. All of them had these latifundiums or oligarchies, which repressed the indigenous tribes and the poor and the darker, like Dominican Republic with the case of Haitians, and were justifying doing this authoritarian ruling as the only way to deal with the dangerous and the ignorant left and the inferior cultures or groups. So this is a pattern we see all over Latin America. I had many other examples. Basically, the military juntas in Argentina and in Cuba, the whole thing happened because of a revolt against oligarchies or the powerful families and Batista's association with the mafia from Chicago, which helped them stay in power with the oligarchy families, as an example. Anyway, recommend a very good book by Vargas Llosa, The Party of the Goat, having to do with regime in Dominican Republic was a wonderful book I read. And a quick summary. So the problem is the process is always slow, but incremental, hard to feel unless it touches you, like COVID deaths. So you have to be very careful. The process is not a shock and awe. It does go slowly. And damage is only clear after the fact. When the dead bodies are found in mass graves, fraud and corruption uncovered, social damage is evident, independent audits and opposition uncovers the facts. So the solution is democracy and awareness building, media coverage and revelations, legislative oversight and actions, and public action by votes, the only solution to avoid massive social unrest and civil war, and coalitions in political and social aspects.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. Thank you so much. I tell you what, you've named some places that really sting. They're very close to us. You know, Cuba is just 90 miles south of Key West. Many of these countries are literally a short airplane ride away from Miami. And we look at them and think, oh my gosh, you know, that could never happen here. Well, I'll tell you what, folks, it really can, and it really is. This is happening now. As a child, my father was in the U.S. Army. He served in Europe at the end of World War II. He was a witness at the Nuremberg trials. The one thing that I have to tell everyone is that he warned us as a child. I can tell you, it's funny, my whole family, whenever there'd be something about the Holocaust on television, he'd call us all together, we'd watch it, we'd talk about it, and then he'd look at all of us and he'd say, this can happen again, it can happen here, and it can happen on your watch. You know, and I mean, I'm a little kid, it's like, but you know what, folks, if what you see on television and what you're reading about in the papers today doesn't bother you a little bit, you need to pay closer attention. If what we saw on the debate the other night doesn't warn you that one of those candidates wants to take over this country for a long time, I don't think you're paying attention. It is the message, I guess, that comes to us through history, the message that comes to us by learning about what's happening around the rest of the world, is that it can happen, and in fact, it is in the process of happening here, in my opinion. And I think that all of our speakers here spoke to that in a different way, perhaps, each from a different perspective. In just a few moments, our Zoom attendees will have the chance to ask questions of our panelists, and I encourage our panelists to ask questions of each other. It's a really good thing to have a discussion amongst the panel because each of you brings experience and viewpoints that I think many of our viewers need to hear. The first thing I would like to ask is, do we have any candidates for local office that are here in our Zoom meeting that would like to be recognized? I'm not certain that we do. We had Daniel McDowell. I know he's a candidate for the city of West Melbourne. I don't know if Daniel is still
Yes, I am. I'm still here.
Daniel, would you like to give us a 2-minute?
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of this group, and I really appreciate all the speakers tonight. I am running as a candidate for the West Melbourne City Council, and I hope to be successful and a progressive voice on the council going forward. With that said, I'm also wearing the hat here as the co-host, so I do want to kind of pay attention. We wanted to mention that Rodney looks like he may have stepped away, Phil, so you may we may not be able to get him right away, but the other speakers are off. They're live with us now as well. But again, thank you for allowing me a minute to introduce myself, and this is your night, so thank you.
It's very important that the Space Coast Progressive Alliance does not endorse candidates. That has been our policy for our entire existence. But I think it's important for us to recognize those that are willing to come to our events, that they should be recognized. We like to give candidates, be they Republican, Democrat, or from a third party, the opportunity to speak. And the opportunity extends to any other candidates that are here. I don't see anyone else. Paul, do you see any other candidates?
No, I do not.
Well, that's going to give us the opportunity now to turn the mic over to our audience. Those of you that are interested in speaking tonight, there should be a little button if you look next to the participants window where you can click it and raise your hand. If you just wave your hand, we might be able to recognize you. If you've got a question for any or all of our panelists, please do so. It's a great opportunity, and this is your chance to take it. Do we have a question? It looks actually.
Okay, yes.
Do we have a question?
There we go.
Questions for Andre.
Yes.
Andre, when did you leave, and did you have any problems getting out?
No, I left at the height of perestroika, well, actually almost at the end of it. The country opened up entirely. I was able to, actually, when I was even a Moscow State University student, meeting an American in a private situation in Moscow would get you interrogated by the KGB. I had a few friends just for talking to an American in private. You could get in trouble. But then Yeltsin dismantled that system, and I was able to be introduced to a group of American professors. One was from Stetson University. I was a professor at the University of Moscow, and they invited me to teach at Stetson University in DeLand, Florida for a year. That was in 1992. So I left when it was as easy as leaving the United States right now, where you didn't have any problems at all. This was a short period of warming up in Russia under Boris Yeltsin before Putin replaced him. So I didn't have any problem. I left in 1992, and ever since I've been here, and I've been really proud. I got my American citizenship 7 years ago, and I'm really proud to be an American, like that song goes. But I'm very concerned to be an American now, seeing what's going on. So, and I really want people to hear what my experience and our panelists' experience taught us with dictatorships.
Thank you, Professor. I noticed that it looked like Jose Luis might have a question for perhaps one of the other panelists.
Yes, I have a question for Andre and one for Raid. Andre, I had an incredible pleasure of meeting a very bright man and dealing with many Russians for different reasons. This gentleman was, do you recall the name, General Oleg Danilovich Kalugin?
Yes, for sure. He defected to the Great Britain. He was a defected KGB general that criticized Putin and exposed a lot of truth about KGB. Wow.
So what happened is when Perestroika, Glasnost took place, and Gorbachev was able to do the quick change. This gentleman was the youngest general in the KGB. He switched around and he became a democratic pro-reform guy overnight. Because you know the issue about Russia, how it works very well.
Yes.
So this guy was here. He did an 180 turn overnight, and all of a sudden he was pro-reform, pro-opening Russia, democratic, and this guy spoke in perfect English. He was very well aware of Puerto Rican and U.S. affairs for 3 hours straight. He was talking and very articulated. It was a master class. Now, can you share that experience with everybody? Because I found that to be the wildest thing. It's like the chief of the CIA, the U.S., somebody decides to change, like Gorbachev, and the guy goes boom overnight, and all of a sudden he's an expert in pro-reform. I mean, that was very interesting. How can you explain that?
Some people saw him as a turncoat, so to speak, like he totally changed it. But, you know, there was some dissidence among the KGB too. Many of the people, just like in the CIA, were very, very deep level analysts. And some of them, I told you about my experience of being in pretty much in the sights of KGB snipers. The guns were pointing at us. But somebody in the KGB called them off. So I don't know who it was. We don't know to this day. But they decided that the bloodshed would actually be not productive at all in that situation. So I would not be surprised. A number of KGB defectors, a couple of them were poisoned by Putin in England, as you heard. But they exposed a lot of truth and the terrible acts of Putin's government that in order to get to power wants to incite fear, and including, I don't know if you heard in the news about before Putin came to power, there was a series of explosions of residential buildings in Moscow, in the outskirts of Moscow, in the suburbs, and then 3 or 4 huge apartment buildings were just blown up as terrorists. But citizens reported paramilitary units just loading some sacks with some powder into the basement of the building, and they were uniformed. So who exploded those buildings? This was exposed to the world by one of the KGB defectors. So he is in England. He was one of those that actually they tried to poison, but they couldn't. So yeah, I totally remember Kalugin, and I don't know if this is genuine or truth, but you know what? If somebody exposes the truth, I really don't care.
I'll tell you what, it's very interesting that what you just mentioned, and that is non-uniformed law enforcement. In some cities, they call them, or some countries, they call them little green men, where you have a legitimate protest, peaceful protest, and then a vehicle drives up and people in black shirts or uniforms jump out, begin punching, fighting, kicking, killing protesters. We've begun seeing that here in the United States. For those who have seen that around the world, it is shocking to think that it's happening here on our own streets.
You know how you beat them? By the numbers. By the numbers. If there's 200,000 people, these people cannot do anything. That's how we beat the communist regime in Russia. It's by the numbers. And then they can't go against such a crowd. So if people are not standing united and people are afraid and people, that's when they can really take over.
And before we
have a question from Larry as well.
Larry, can I ask you just a moment? Before we go to our next question, I'm going to ask, let's go through our speakers. I'm going to ask you, if you would, what would you like as an action item tonight? What would you like each of our audience members, each of our viewers to do? And something that they can do when they leave this event tonight. Let me just start from the top. Raed, do you have an action item for our viewers? I'm not sure if I still have you, Raed.
He's muted. Raed is muted.
Can we fix that, guys?
Yes, he's up. Hang on a second. Go ahead. Right.
Yeah. All right. You good?
Yes, we hear you 5 by 5.
Action item is there's a lot at stake right now. So here in the state, my main thing is to educate people that what everyone was speaking about today is, you call them the oligarch or media and money. Media and money is a big factor in a democracy, and we need to make sure that we don't allow media and the money to be a factor to sway one over the other. So the media, I think we're balanced right now in the country. I know we have Fox and we have CNN on both sides, and everyone is representing a different view. But I think money is a big factor in politics. And I think the more it gets bigger, the more the influence on the people will get easier. And if anything you want to take back is allow people to diverse, you can't have control of, like Jose was saying, you can't have people have power and money and commerce at the same time. So just keep that on top priority. That's what happened in the Middle East, and that's why I left.
So how would our viewers take action in that regard? You would like them to contact their senators, their congressmen, to try to overturn Citizens United, or what? What do you do about that as individuals?
There is a lot of policies, of course, that have to change. We have a lot of PACs that are created easy. PACs can be good and can be bad, and we have also limitation on how much contribution certain people can. So if you're like the Soros, Soros have a lot of money, it can donate, he can sway elections. We have. I'm speaking on both sides of the aisle, so I don't think that's fair. I don't think that if you have money, you can sway people. So we need to make sure that we can challenge these. Send letters to representative. This is something that has to change somehow. I don't know the means to change it, but we need to make sure that it does not stay as a factor.
So legislation to fix the Citizens United decision is your action item. Let me move along to Professor Bailey. What would you like to leave as an action item for our audience?
I think I already told what I would like. Obviously, I would like our audience to understand what's at stake at this election, and very importantly, if the election is won by Joe Biden and President Trump and his supporters are going to deny it and take action, we must take action. We cannot just let them do this. I am speaking like somebody who's seen how this powerful movement of the people can stop dictators before it's too late. So I don't know in what form, but we cannot accept fraud, and we cannot accept a dictator stealing the elections. If you want to watch the news, watch what's happening in Belarus. Millions of people are protesting. The whole country is on strike. That type of unity against a dictator is something we can only dream about. But if we do have to do our part, we have to. We cannot just let it go and say, oh, well, what can you do? That's what we cannot afford. This will be the most un-American thing to do for everybody.
I think that you had said earlier, one of the most important things would be if people fail to vote, or if people vote for the wrong person.
Yes, it starts with voting. Yeah,
to have overwhelming participation in this election.
And that's what I keep telling my students, that it's a duty. It's not a choice. I speak with a lot of young people in the auditoriums, and hundreds and hundreds every semester, and that we discuss a lot of issues. And I'm very optimistic because most of these people, most of our young people, are not on the dictator side. I can testify to that because I deal with them. They're speaking freely in the classroom. Nobody coerces them into saying anything. And I'm stunned in their essays, in their reports, in their presentations in class, how they all want the United States to be a democracy. How many of them are opposed to the what President Trump and his government are bringing into this. I'm not even telling them, I'm telling them this is free speech. You can say anything you want. I'm not a leftist activist professor at all. And let me assure you that the majority of them, with a few exceptions, very few, are pro-liberal, moderately liberal, or they're, but will they vote? That's the question. That's what I keep telling them. Vote, take action. Don't just be inside against it. You must do something.
And speak out, speak your mind.
Speak your mind, right?
Rodney Edwards, I'm not sure if you're still with us. Are you here, Rodney? Doesn't look like it. I'm going to pass it on to Jose Luis. What would you like our audience to have as an action item, something that they should do, something that they can do when they leave this event tonight?
Aside from the sign of peace, two things. One would be get involved in learning about the candidates, and you can do that going to YouTube. I've gone into the interviews that have been done by a local show in Brevard, I forget the name, and I was one of two that was listening to what Randy Foster had to say. So your candidates, let's go on local politics, deal with the local community and get involved in that, and make sure you go to these candidates forums and speak out. I saw a lot of supporters of the other gentleman that was running, Mr. Gum, running against him, and they were making it very hard on Randy. And there was only basically two of us, and I'm not living in Brevard anymore. I used to live in Satellite Beach, but I was supportive of Randy, and I was trying to give him, some kind of a support morale structure there. So it's important to learn, but also to be involved in trying to ask the proper questions and participating in all these debates and forums. But the other thing is try to donate a little bit of money to whoever you think you can help. It's going to make a difference until we change Citizens United. I'm actually facilitator and advisor to a PAC, his PAC, deals with Hispanic candidates, Political Action Committee. And we just contribute as much as we can, but we try to make it happen. And just like Bernie was able to raise a lot of funds, in the case now of Florida, Bloomberg is investing $100 million to turn the state and influence Hispanic votes here in the state of Florida. So while the name of the game, and I'm not taking just an opposing view to Raid, but while the name of the game is money now, until things change, we should have to deal with the rules of the road right now. So, and then a quick question for Raid. Raid, the King of Spain got about $80 million from King Salman from Saudi Arabia. You heard of that, right?
Yes, I mean, I don't think 80 million is it's a change for the amount of money that he blew on yachts, on stuff that he hung on his wall.
So the interesting anecdote here is the oligarchies, the Old Boys Network. The King of Saudi Arabia gave this money to the King of Spain, who gave it to his mistress and put it in money in Panama. And they're also very close friends. And I'm not being judgmental, but they're very close friends with the Bushes in Texas. You know about this, right?
Yes. I mean, so, it's been, all the leaks that's been happening lately have exposed and brought to the surface a lot of these things. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are benefiting from it. So they're trying to hide it, trying to brush it, like many other things, unfortunately. And this is one of the issues that I brought up high. We see a lot of dictatorship in the Middle East and in Russia, but we still have a lot of politicians who support this kind of, leadership overseas. You build relationship with people. You don't build a relationship with a person, because you're going to lose that dictator one day. You need to build relationship between nations. And unfortunately, I know strategically you have to be in that region, on oil. But it's unfortunate when you talk about 500 million people, 441 million people are being suppressed. And we had many chances to support them and let it go. So it's about time, Republican and Democrats failed in that area. Our foreign policy are not balanced. We need to look at our foreign policy and let the people, we are the leaders of the free world, as we say. We need to act upon it, because if we go to the Middle East, everyone wants to come to America because it's it's the leaders of freedom. It's the dream, the place where all the dreams come true. We can bring them all here, We
The
need to
Saudis-
allow them to make life better over there.
The Saudis and the Russians were the first two visitors to the White House. You recall that?
Yes, he went actually to Saudi Arabia first.
He did,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, but
And then he went to, I don't know if he went to Russia second, but I know his
No,
first
this-
stop was
the
Saudi
visit-
Arabia.
to the White House, the first two official visits from foreign countries to the White House were the Saudis and the Russians.
Well, it's the first visit from our president outside was to
Yes.
Saudi.
Wow.
That's even worse.
Amazing.
Anyway,
Amazing.
we have another question waiting. Larry Abdullah. I'm going to ask folks to please identify yourself, state your name, and limit your questions to 2 minutes, please.
I'm Larry. Okay, well, I was just looking at reports, and there are reports about democracy and dictatorship across the world. And what I was looking at is about 40% dictatorship right now. And maybe it's moving in the wrong direction. But we were heroes of democracy after World War II. But, you know, and many of us during the Vietnam War and other times, Central and South America, thought that maybe we were not advocating for democracy in those areas. We were not as concerned for democracy in Central and South America, but at times we have been. Jimmy Carter and actually Hillary actually tried to interfere with Russian dictatorship. She tried to promote, one would say, democracy in Russia, but it went very, very wrong. That's one of the reasons why Putin hated her guts. So the question I have, assuming that democracy wins in this election, how would you advise Putin as to what he should do around the world to promote democracy?
Not Putin. I think you mean whoever the next president is?
No, I mean if democracy prevails. I'm muted now. I mean if democracy prevails, which means Biden. If Trump has shown no interest in promoting democracy as far as I can see.
So are you asking Professor Bailey how he would, or all of them?
Well, presume whoever wins, how do you think the United States, what do you think the United States should do to promote democracy around the world? We know what happened with the in Saudi Arabia, et cetera, that we kind of let happen. But what do you think we should do? Because a lot of these presidents have either gone a little bit the wrong way or they've had trouble. And we, till now, I've never really been worried about our basic institutions in the United States.
All right, who on our panel would like to take that one?
Well, I can talk about what to do with Putin. There's no way you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. This man is a brutal dictator. He hates the West. He hates democracy. He is a dictator in his heart, and no negotiations are possible with him. But however, if it was Ronald Reagan now or Margaret Thatcher or anybody on the West side, Putin would not have been able to do many things that he's doing right now, including Crimea and the annexation of Crimea, which was, by the way, done by paramilitary without insignia. This is how they were dressed. There are plenty of footage about that. So with Putin, you have to stay tough. You have to press them. You have to sanctions. There are plenty of sanctions that are actually working. I hear from inside of Russia how people are beginning to suffer more and more economically. And unfortunately, it may be a cruel thing to say, but Russia has to collapse before it is reborn. Putin concentrates all the resources on the military. He's rebuilding the military. He's challenging the United States all over the world and the West. He will invade pretty much any country if he could. He sent warships to Venezuela as a sign of defiance. We're supporting, that was, I think Chavez, not Maduro, was there yet. So with him, you gotta show force. You have to sanction, you have to limit their economic power. You have to go after their assets, because unlike communists, Putin's money is in the West. All his oligarchs are, I mean, they own so much of Europe, ski resorts, oil processing plants and everything else. This money is there. It's so easy to sanction them and it's already been done. Some of their assets were frozen in the Swiss banks and everything, but it has to be a war. You cannot talk to Putin. You cannot persuade him. He is not going to back off as long as he is in power. That's the only outcome. And that's what I would advise to Joe Biden. Stay tough on him. Don't compromise. Don't negotiate. And it's not going to work. This is not a man that will change his views or understand something he doesn't want to understand.
Well, I mean, I think economics has a lot to do with the strength of all leaders all over the world, and most of this economic strengths come right now for Russia and for the Middle East, where the dictatorships are focused, and Venezuela, for example, is because of oil. Oil is a big factor.
Natural gas for Russia, natural gas.
And natural gas, of course. So the minute I was speaking to Phil a few days ago, the minute we start diversifying our use of solar energy, start getting away from oil, then they have no power anymore. Then that value is not of any interest. And I think that's a big factor. It's a long-term process. It's not going to happen overnight. The other factor is, there's no way to change these dictators overnight. The issue is to within our circle in the United States, what can we do to help our neighbors to understand the diversity, that that there's democracy is not something bad in the Middle East. They all think that we have to keep those control over that area because we have a lot of oil. We have the Suez Canal. We have to have control over it. That we have to change that. We have to educate people that freedom is good overall. It helps economics. It helps move. A lot of money can circulate a lot easier when you have a lot of people involved. But when you're dealing with one asshole, when one person instead of a lot of people, then it's not good for the long run. It's a few people are benefiting from this right now. Stocks of Chevron, lately it's been down, but if you look at these are the big companies that are benefiting. Oil companies, arms sales, and that's about it. And I don't have stocks. You don't have stocks in these companies. None of us have stock in all these companies. So we are supporting a policy that benefits stockholders in oil and in arms dealers, in armed companies.
Jose Luis, what advice would you give to the next president?
To the next president, I think what Andre was saying and Raid is very revealing. The fact is, I think Putin has won in many ways. He's very smart. He's ultra smart, and he's been able to sow chaos. So he cannot be allowed to interfere in our elections. We have to take a strong stance in preventing that hacking and all of that stuff from happening, and take a firm stance with him, because he's affecting the world, but he's affecting us. He knows he cannot do it with weapons. He can do it with intelligence, and that's exactly what he's doing. So we have to be on the watch out for Russia and China, take a firm stance, but be outsmarting them and not trying to fight silly tariffs and stuff like that. We got to go deeper and do a thorough analysis of foreign affairs and take a much more stringent approach. And the other thing is to promote a more conciliatory attitude towards Latin America. The fact is the Chinese have taken over the world, and it would be too long to explain now, but they're taking strategic positions in Cuba, in the piers, in the major ports, and in hotels and golf courses. All over the Cuban economy and all over Latin America, making significant investments in infrastructure, which when there's a default on payment, they'll take over, roads or petrochemicals or whatever it is. So the influence of China and Russia is far greater than the US in many ways, and people don't know it.
The entire Far East is basically under Chinese domination. Chinese farmers move in, take land, buy land, cheap, bribe local officials. They cut down virgin forests of Siberia. So some of the things we are buying made in China they're using that wood, and they're doing it with total environmental, just like what Brazilian president is doing to the rainforest. Same approach. Their money talks. They bribe everybody. So yeah, that part of Russia is entirely under Chinese influence.
Australia is taken over by the Chinese. A lot of Australian investments are all by the Chinese. And in the case of, you mentioned Russia, their Saudi investment to get water, because they have a problem with water, and Raid knows about this. in Arizona that were able to buy huge farms and bring water from underground, and to be able to get flour cultivated. So there's strong influences from the Saudis buying huge plots of land in the U.S. There's significant Russian investment in Kentucky. You know about this, right, Andre?
Yeah, they were, yeah. Well, they own some of our nuclear power infrastructure, right? I remember that happened on the
Some major manufacturing facilities, and that's a state coincidentally Mitch McConnell is, by the way. And
right.
By the way, and you know there's some involvement there, right?
And the dependence on Russian national gas in Europe, you can't even imagine. They can literally shut down Europe if they stop exporting the national gas. And that's why many German politicians and Europeans are very, very careful, because they know it could cause an economic collapse, even if Russia raises their rates on it. But
Gazprom, right?
Yeah, natural gas, but Gazprom, yeah. But there's some interesting developments, though. Some countries that are really fearing Russian invasion, like the Baltic republics, Lithuania, Estonia, they stopped importing Poland. They stopped importing Russian gas, and they're buying the United States natural gas liquefied. That they're bringing barges across the ocean. Poland was, I think, the first one that started that. They just eliminated their dependence on, and it's good for the United States. So they're buying American national gas. And it's apparently cheaper than the Russian gas. It's just across the border. So there are attempts to overthrow that dependence, but it's still gigantic. Europe is not able to overcome that. That's why the United States leadership could be very important. Working on their European allies, but I think they're beginning to realize who Putin really is. It's getting there. It's getting there.
So who would like to ask our next question? Do we have a question waiting? Surely there's somebody who's got a question for this fantastic panel.
Bonnie has a question, Phil.
Bonnie, please identify yourself and ask your question. You've got 2 minutes, although she's our timekeeper, so she can probably control it.
I'm letting you go on this part of this meeting.
This is the ultimate authoritarian here who's got control of our time. Yes?
No, Raid touched on this already. I'm hearing about all this gas and everything else. Is the rest of the world aware that we're in a climate crisis? I mean, this isn't part of authoritarianism, but when you talk about the machinery of the world, it just doesn't fit in the reality of what we know is going on. I mean, can somebody speak to that?
Well, as I said before, it's, pollution is a big factor. All the manufacturing right now, we need to start moving away from oil. I mean, if we do, it will make a big impact on our on the environment in general, and also it will move this dictatorship that we're talking about. They will loosen up their grip. So how do we move away from it? Is just, I mean, I'm happy to hear that there's a lot of regulation here in the country. That California is pushing for certain changes. Solar energy has a big future here. We just need to keep supporting it. Is it going to happen soon? I don't know, Bonnie, if there's anything substantial right now in the near time that we're looking at. But it's a strategy, and that's the difference between Biden and between Trump. It's you have to get into power. You have to get into a position to propagate these visions, and hopefully we'll get that. I mean, that's what it was one of the questions in the last debate, and you can tell he was promoting money. That's all he was. He only cares about money. Environment comes second.
I guess you could always burn money for heat.
What about the rest of the world, though? I mean, are they at all in this conversation?
Well, in China, when they were running the Olympics in Beijing, the government ordered to shut down factories with this 300-mile radius because athletes would not be able to breathe. This is how Chinese live every day. So they've been wearing these masks for decades already. So, but what can you do in a dictatorship? You cannot influence that because every dictatorship is corrupt. And money talks. So people in a society that's not democratic cannot influence anything environmentally. And they just have to suck it up and breathe that air. There are Russian cities where my wife used to be a researcher for the University of Moscow. The city of Norilsk, which produces most of the Russian aluminum and exports it to the world, cancer rate is 10 times higher in the city than in the mainland. So because of that plant, but people are not able to do anything. People just can't do anything. This is why we need a democracy. This is why Democrats are so environmental, because we can do things. If you don't put pressure on the corrupt government, environmental issues are not going to help, because they could just be making more money. They're going to be fracking. They're going to be, doing everything they're doing to make more money. This is what Trump is doing. So that's how environmental issues and politics are interestingly intertwined.
And so much so, I'd like to add very quickly, Deripaska, he's a surrogate and crony of Putin. He's the one that's behind all these investments in Kentucky.
Yes, Boris Deripaska, right.
They're getting involved in local politics in Kentucky to try to bring it eventually to Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Deripaska's involved in all that. And then on the other hand, Bonnie, I would like to raise the issue of Alaska, the reserve area. It's been taken away, the environmental protections on Alaska. And if that is, all the trees are taken down there, it's going to amount to about 300 million vehicles. You heard about this that just happened? This was in Alaska. A major natural reserve was taken away off the register so that timber forests can be taken down. And
same thing that's happening in Russia. They depleting Siberian forests, and the oligarchs are profiteering from it. Putin is involved in an absolutely disgraceful campaign, thinking about patriotism. He imports nuclear waste from like German nuclear power plants in French and buries them in Russia against all regulation. Or burying nuclear waste is a very expensive, procedure, and they just dump it. That's from what I heard, into the northern seas of Russia. So profit, and who is profiting from it? The oligarchs. So this is a situation that cannot be changed without changing the political system. That's why we need a political system that will be friendly to the environment, or we're going to lose this country and its beauty. It's pretty close.
Poisoning the earth for hundreds of thousands of years for short-term profits. Our grandkids will never forgive us.
Right.
Do we have another question? There should be another question for this fantastic panel. One of the things that I would ask is that what is it that concerns you most that you're seeing today, coming from the White House, coming from Bill Barr, who is promoting the unified executive, things that are happening within the American government right now that are probably the biggest flashing red light that you see? What around the horn, each of you, what is it that concerns you most about what's happening now? And what do you think it would look like if the current president is reelected?
I think the one that strikes me most is how easy a person in power can turn people who are fear. He used fear, and he brought in all the supremacists out to speak loudly. I was standing on the line, and people are talking about buying ammunition because they're ready to take on other people. I mean, it's the fear that he brought in and the amount of it brought in the ugliness that we have in a lot of our it's something embedded in us, and to clean that up, it's going to take a lot. So that's why I'm saying we need to embody them. We cannot reject the other side when you disagree with them, because that's just going to create this rift, and it's going to get bigger and worse. We cannot use the same method that they're using. I know that the professor he's saying that we need to face them and we need to show them. I know we do, but at the same time, we need to find a way to connect with the civilian, because the dictators are doing this. They like this, and this is my fear: is they're turning us against each other. And that's what's happening. That's what happened when I grew up. They were turning people against each other. So that is my fear. That's the thing that I've seen from this president.
I just want to respond. I was specifically talking about the outcome of the elections. If Joe Biden wins the election, and then what will happen? I've seen situations like that, and it's very important that people act to defend their rights.
But I think we have the law. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think the law and order. I think the police will get involved. The law, the army will get involved. I mean, I don't think we are. I mean, I know you lived through that. I don't think we are that crazy to allow someone to say, I'm not going to accept the election and just watch him. Do you think that that's possible?
Yeah, I think it's possible. All you need is a few generals that, like in Latin America, that become part of that new establishment, and they move the troops, and the troops do whatever they're ordered to do. It's very, very possible. Trust me. You can't rely on, well, maybe you can in the United States, but I've seen in Russia how it didn't work. Putin actually fires generals directly, periodically, completely eliminating them from their positions to prevent any, because he comes from the KGB force, so the army is the only other opposition. So, but all the top generals have periodically completely fired, and then you are appointed. He appointed his buddy to be the Minister of Defense, who has had no military experience whatsoever. So maybe we're not there yet, but what concerns me is how the system of checks and balances that the democracy is based on could slowly be eroded and then disappear. And then you're not gonna have any democracy. So that's what I'm afraid of.
So, for example, having a Supreme Court that is 6-3 in favor of the president, to have a House of Representatives or a Senate that is afraid to take action or that is ineffective. They may go and make speeches, but they don't seem to be able to stop what the third branch is doing. The third branch is assuming powers that we've never seen.
But that's democracy, Phil. And I know you said vote has consequences. And consequences is the vote, and I'm not. I gotta give it to them. They got to this point. They have the right. You know what? We have to take over these seats back and flip this stuff. Unfortunately, we need to stick to the principles. And I agree with you emotionally, but I think they have the right. Unfortunately,
it is taken 40.
While we can. People in Belarus also want to vote, but nothing influences the dictator.
And Jose Luis, do you want to address this issue before we wind this down?
I think you want to bring it home again. You have a situation with Sheriff Wayne Ivey there that is saying there's an imminent attack to your homes. You have to have your guns handy, not in the car in the house, on you, because by the time the deputy gets to your home, it may be too late because there's an imminent attack from terrorists that are coming to town. I guess you all have heard this.
Yeah, it's been a while.
what I'm getting to is you guys have to get involved in strong politics to make things change, because the state of chaos and tension that's created with this supposed to be imminent attack, and I've read about it twice already. He's made those declarations. Requires that actions are undertaken, and of course you have to support those that are in your same viewpoint, and that will protect the community, but also maintain a climate of conciliation and reconciliation.
Bill, do we have time? Larry has a follow-up question, I believe.
Larry Abdullah, is that correct?
Yes.
Larry, go for it. You've got 3 minutes. We're about to do.
We never had a program on white supremacism. And of course, we heard the president's remark at the debate really calling forward the Proud Boys. But they're kind of we know their numbers are massive. What do you think could happen with them? I really don't think we know exactly. What do you folks feel about their threat at this time?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
We heard it.
We have to label them. I mean, if we label them like we label the other side, we have to label both sides that are extremist. I think it's important that we are fair when we label people who are acting beyond the law. And if we label them and everyone agrees that this is wrong, then their effect is going to be limited by the law. We have to stick to the law, and we have to make sure that the laws are guided. And as far as you said, Jose Luis said about the sheriff in this town. That's exactly what he has the right. He has the support. He has the vote. So he will continue to say it. But if he doesn't have the vote, he will not say it. So votes have consequences. We need to take over and change things by by the right way, the American way. And I'm talking in general, but this is the only way we can do it. I don't see any other way to make change.
Well, to summarize for our three remaining speakers, our three remaining panelists, your action items. I'm going to let each of you take the floor for just a moment to restate your action item, if you would, please. Ryan, since you were just speaking, tell us what your action items. Remind us of that.
Just educate yourself. Don't just listen to one news channel. Read newspapers. Read people's opinion. If you follow just the news, you're just part of the herd. And vote. Two things. And get involved in your locality. Politics is local, and just don't be fooled. Don't be a follower. You can always have a voice at the end of the day if you're educating yourself.
Professor Bailey.
Well, as I said before, maybe I'm sounding too radical, but I've participated in this. I've seen it happening. You know, the only thing that can stop a dictator, if you can't vote, if the voting is not working for whatever reason, because the dictator it's not working in Belarus, it's not working in Russia. Defend democracy, take action, civil disobedience, do not accept the outcome, because once a dictator takes over, all these institutions that protect our rights will be dismantled. It's going to be a very quick and a process, and it's extremely difficult to get them back. People in Belarus now would like to get them back, but they have to really go through a lot of bloodshed in order even to take them back, and they don't know what to do. So once you let it go, getting it back is going to be an enormously difficult and costly task. So we should not lose that instead of getting them back. That's what we need to do. That's why we need to vote, and we need to watch what's happening and speak out.
Jose Luis, what would you like to end with?
Most certainly what they've said is so much on point. So I'd just like to add to try to view those debates that are going on about local politics and be involved in them, and at least watch them and ask questions, and then contribute to any causes of any proper politicians and platforms that are aligned with your viewpoints. Make sure you put your money where your mouth is, because that's the American way we got to work with now.
I'll tell you what, for everyone that is watching on Facebook Live and those of us that are here at the Zoom meeting, I want to stand up and give you all a round of applause. It is so important that you have taken your time tonight. For everyone that has joined us, for each of our speakers, we must vote. I'm encouraging you, even if you have not yet registered to vote by mail, you still have time to do that. Once your vote is submitted, if you do a mail-in ballot, you can track your vote by going to the Supervisor of Elections website, and you can see when your vote is received. You can see when your vote is counted. It's actually reported on the website. If you prefer to do it in person, early voting is what we really need. We need everybody to vote early. If you get your ballot in the mail, do not hold on to it and do your research. Do your research now. Make your decision and be prepared to complete that ballot and get it in the mail, or you can drive it to the Supervisor of Elections offices here in Brevard or wherever you're located. Vote. This is, I think, our overwhelming message for all of us, because democracy is in your hands. Please, from all of us, vote for the best candidate. If you are interested in supporting a candidate, I know we discussed that tonight, a couple bucks out of your pocket to pick a local candidate, because all politics is local, right? We've said that many times. And I would like to remind you that the program must not end here. It must not be just the people that are in this group. When you leave this event tonight, I'm asking all of you, please take this message to your friends. Help a friend vote. Help your neighbor vote. Make sure that you get out and do something this election to get other people involved. This is imperative. I'm telling all of you, if we do not do this, we may be very, very sorry come the end of the election process. Do not lose faith in the election process. Do not lose faith in our Constitution. Because if we stand together and we vote and we fight together to defend our Constitution, we may have something to celebrate at the end of this horrible year 2020. And I would like to remind everyone, November 5th, the first Thursday of the month of November, will be our program, Truth and Reconciliation. let's hope that we find truth and that we can reconcile and heal our country, and that in the end of this year, 2020, that we can join together, be proud of being Americans, to be proud of our neighbors and proud of our brothers and sisters, because we must. On that note, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank everyone that has joined us. Thank you for again, everyone together. I'll give a round of applause to our wonderful speakers. Please take action, speak out. We'll see you on the first Thursday of November. And after this election, we can all celebrate together. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
You're very welcome, everyone. Good night.